Let's add inline CSS to our code. If you recall from the previous video, we have 3 ways to apply CSS. And we're going to start with the one that's not considered the best way to go about adding CSS. To see why that is, let's take a look at an example and then apply that to our code. In this inline example, we use the style attribute inside the opening HTML tag to apply inline CSS. For example, inside this paragraph tag, we have style and then equal, followed by something inside double quotes. This would be the declaration that changes the font size to 14 pixels. Since we are dealing with a different language than HTML, we will also have to learn a different kind of syntax. We'll get into more detail about that in the next video or so, but for now, just kind of work with me here. Just kind of go with the flow here. Let's try this example with this paragraph right after the H1. The default is 16 pixels for any text that's inside a paragraph. What you're seeing in this preview for all these paragraphs, that's 16 pixels. Using inline CSS, let's double that to 32 pixels. In the code, we'll say style equals, then double quotes. Inside the double quote, we will change the font size and 32px. Make sure that when you type in 32px that you do not have a space between the number and px. If you put a space there, this is not going to work. Save that, refresh our preview, and now this paragraph with the inline CSS is 32 pixels. If I want the other paragraphs to be 32 pixels using inline CSS, I would have to go line by line and put in that style attribute in the opening paragraph tag. This is similar to the whole concept behind HTML formatting. When we use the font attribute or the font tag, to change the color of the H2 elements from green or to green and then to blue. With inline CSS, we would have to go line by line, and that is not going to be very efficient, especially if you are dealing with a full enterprise website. Right now, our example only has 1 page, but if you have a website that has 100 pages, well, imagine all the different elements there, just paragraph elements, for example. Imagine how many of those you would have to make edits to if you were to want to change something as simple as the font size. Now, UCM's website, that has over 12,000 pages. So can you imagine going through 12,000 pages and going line by line just to change that? And that's just the font size. So I hope that you can appreciate why inline CSS would not be the best way to go about this. So let's move on to something that's a little better. That would be embedded CSS or internal CSS. Embedded CSS appears in the head section. That would be this portion of your HTML. We use the style element to add an internal or embedded CSS. For example, Here's the opening style tag with a type attribute indicating that this is a text slash CSS type of type. I don't know how else to put that. And then here's our closing style tag. So let's do that to our example. We'll put it right after the title tag, style type equals text CSS. We're just declaring that this is a CSS kind of text within this HTML. Here's our closing style tag. Now, in between the opening and closing style tags, we could put in the different CSS rules. In this example, let's do something with the H1. Let's do this. So that's an H1, followed by an opening curly bracket, and then we have a closing curly bracket. Again, I will talk more about the syntax behind CSS, but for now, just kind of go with me here. Let's do something with the font size. The default is 32 pixels for H1 elements. Let's double that. Let's make it 64 pixels. Let's be wild, right? For the color, let's do UCM colors. Let's make it red instead of black. And finally, or let's do two more actually. Let's change the font that we're using. Right now, the default is to use a serif kind of font. Let's make it use a sans serif kind of font. And then finally, the default for H1 elements is to appear in bold. Let's not make this appear in bold. We'll say font dash weight should be normal. Save that and refresh, and that's what we get after applying the embedded or internal CSS. Now this H1 element is 64 pixels big. It is in red instead of black. It's using a sans serif kind of font, looks like Arial or Helvetica. And now the font weight is normal. It's no longer in bold. You'll also find that it went ahead and changed the other H1 elements in this page. So if you can kind of extend that thinking, this means that you can quickly make changes to a particular element just with one CSS rule. In this case, H1 changes every single H1 in this page. Now I said in this page. So what this means is that internal or embedded CSS is page specific. And this is why it's still not as good as external CSS. This CSS you see here, this embedded or internal CSS, only applies to this last name dash lab dash 2.html file. It will not apply to any other pages in your website. If I want to apply this same style sheet or CSS to other pages, I would have to copy this and then paste it into the head section of my other pages. And as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, as an example, UCM's website it's got 12,000 pages. So you will be running into the same issue again. You will have to make edits to each page in their inline, or excuse me, in their internal CSS just to make like a change. In this case, if you just wanted to make changes to the H1, you would have to go through 12,000 pages. And that just makes me tired thinking about it. Yikes. So that leads me to the best way to go about adding CSS, and that's external CSS. And we will do that in the next video.